What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved and humble actors walks onto a talk show set expecting a normal conversation, only to be blindsided by a host who seems determined to make him look bad? In just 30 seconds, a single dismissive comment would turn a friendly interview into the most shocking ejection in daytime television history. The studio lights were bright that afternoon. The audience was buzzing with excitement. Keanu Reeves, the man everyone knows for being kind and down to earth, walked onto Kelly Clarkson's stage with his usual quiet smile. People were clapping. Cameras were rolling. Everything seemed perfect. But something felt different from the very start. Kelly sat in her chair with a look that wasn't quite welcoming. It wasn't the warm energy people expected from her show. Keanu settled into his seat, ready to talk about his latest film project. But before he could even get comfortable, Kelly jumped right in with an edge to her voice. "So Keanu, let me ask you something," Kelly started, leaning forward in her seat. "Do you ever get tired of playing the same character over and over again? I mean, how many times can you do the strong silent type before it gets, I don't know, boring?" The audience went quiet. You could feel the tension immediately. Keanu's smile faded just a bit, but he stayed calm. That's who he is. Always calm. "I think every character I play has something different to offer," Keanu replied softly. "I try to find the truth in each role, no matter how similar they might seem on the surface." Kelly laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was sharp. Cutting. "The truth? Come on. You're basically doing the same stunts, the same brooding looks, the same everything. Don't you think audiences deserve something more original?" People in the crowd shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't banter. This wasn't playful. This was something else entirely. Keanu took a breath, his hands resting calmly on the armrests of his chair. "I respect your opinion," he said quietly, "but I pour my heart into every project. The physical work, the emotional preparation, it all matters to me." "Physical work?" Kelly interrupted, her voice getting louder. "You have stunt doubles for half of it. Let's be real here." Now the audience was really uncomfortable. A few people gasped. Keanu sat up a little straighter, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. "Actually, I do most of my own stunts," Keanu corrected her, his voice still even. "I train for months. I work with incredible teams who trust me to do the work safely." Kelly waved her hand dismissively, like she was swatting away a fly. Sure. But let's talk about something more interesting. Your personal life? Or should I say, your lack of one? When was the last time you were actually in a serious relationship? It's been what? Years?" The air in the studio turned ice cold. Crew members behind the cameras looked at each other with wide eyes. This was crossing a line. Everyone knew it. Keanu's face changed. The kindness was still there, but now there was something else. Hurt. Confusion. "I don't think that's appropriate," Keanu said, his voice low but firm. "Oh, come on. Don't be so sensitive," Kelly shot back, rolling her eyes. "You're a public figure. People want to know. Are you just too picky? Too damaged? What's the deal?" Several audience members audibly gasped. One woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was painful to watch. Keanu looked directly at Kelly, his eyes searching hers for some explanation, some reason why she was doing this. "Kelly, I came here to talk about my work," he said calmly, "not to be attacked about my personal choices." "Attacked?" Kelly laughed again, that same sharp sound. "This is a talk show, Keanu. We talk. Or did you expect me to just sit here and worship you like everyone else does? The whole Keanu is perfect thing is honestly exhausting." The producers in the booth were scrambling. You could see people with headsets talking frantically, pointing at monitors, clearly unsure of what to do. This was live television. This was spiraling. Fast. Keanu remained still, his composure holding by a thread. But you could see it in his eyes. the sadness, the disbelief. Here was a man who had experienced profound loss in his life, who had always treated people with kindness, being mocked for his pain. "I never asked anyone to worship me," Keanu said quietly. "I just try to be a good person. I try to do good work. I don't understand why you're being so hostile." "Hostile?" Kelly's voice went up an octave. "I'm being honest. Maybe that's something you're not used to, because everyone around you is always kissing up to you. The motorcycle guy, the internet boyfriend. It's all an act, isn't it?" That was it. That was the moment. Keanu stood up slowly, deliberately. He unclipped the small microphone from his shirt with steady hands. The studio was dead silent, except for the soft click of the mic being removed. Every single person was holding their breath. "I don't need to sit here and listen to this," Keanu said, his voice quiet but filled with dignity. "I've been disrespected in a lot of ways in this industry, but I've never had a host attack me like this for no reason." Kelly stood up too, her face flushed red, clearly not expecting this response. "Oh, you're leaving? Really? You can't handle a little tough questioning?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tough questioning would be fine," Keanu replied, looking at her directly. "This is cruelty. There's a difference." The audience started murmuring. Some people were nodding. Others looked shocked. A few were already pulling out their phones, knowing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Keanu set the microphone down, gently on his chair, and turned to walk off the stage. "Don't you dare walk." "Out on me," Kelly called after him, her voice getting shrill. "Do you know how many people would kill to be on this show?" Keanu stopped. He turned back to face her, and when he spoke, his voice was so calm it made her outburst seem even more unhinged by comparison. "Then maybe you should treat your guests with the respect they deserve," he said simply. Kelly's face turned an even deeper shade of red. She pointed her finger at him, shaking with anger. "You know what your problem is, Keanu. You think you're better than everyone else. You walk around with this humble act, but deep down, you're just as arrogant as the rest of them." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Keanu just looked at her with sad eyes, the kind of sadness that comes from being deeply misunderstood by someone who should know better. "I've never thought I was better than anyone," he said softly. "But I also know I don't deserve to be treated like this. Nobody does." A producer finally rushed onto the stage, trying to salvage the situation. He was talking quickly, gesturing between Keanu and Kelly, clearly attempting damage control. But Keanu shook his head. "I'm done here," he said to the producer. "I'm sorry, but I can't stay." Kelly threw her hands up in theatrical frustration. "Fine, leave then. See if I care. We don't need you anyway," she shouted, her voice echoing through the studio. The audience was completely divided now. Some people were booing, though it wasn't clear if they were booing Keanu for leaving or Kelly for her behavior. Others were just sitting in stunned silence, unable to process what they were watching unfold. Keanu walked toward the stage exit with his head held high, his dignity intact despite everything. As he moved past the cameras, one of them caught a close-up of his face. There was hurt there, yes, but also resolve. He knew he was making the right choice. He knew his worth. "This is unbelievable," Kelly yelled at the audience, her arms spread wide. "He just walks out because he can't handle the truth. This is what happens when celebrities live in their bubbles for too long." But the audience wasn't buying it anymore. The boos were getting louder, and they were clearly directed at her now. People were standing up. Some were walking out themselves. A woman in the third row shouted something that the microphones didn't quite catch, but it made Kelly's face go pale. Behind the scenes, crew members were having heated discussions. Stage managers were on their radios. The whole production had descended into chaos. This wasn't how these things were supposed to go. Talk shows had conflict sometimes, sure, but this was different. This was a complete meltdown. Kelly tried to regain control, holding up her hands to quiet the crowd. Okay, okay, everyone calm down, she said, but her voice was shaking now. The confidence from before was cracking. Let's just take a breath here. But it was too late. The damage was done. Keanu was already backstage, surrounded by concerned production assistants and his own team. Someone brought him water. Someone else apologized profusely on behalf of the show. Keanu just nodded, still processing what had happened. Back on stage, Kelly was spiraling. She kept trying to justify her behavior to the audience, but every word just made it worse. I was just asking real questions, she insisted. Questions that people actually want answered. Why is that so wrong? Why do we have to treat celebrities like they're made of glass? Someone from the audience yelled back, "There's a difference between real questions and being mean." Kelly's face flushed again. She looked at her producers in the wings, clearly hoping for support, but they just looked back at her with expressions that said everything. They knew this was bad. Really bad. "You know what?" Kelly said, her voice tight. "Maybe you're all right. Maybe Keanu Reeves is just too precious to be asked anything challenging. Maybe we should all just bow down and never question anything he does." The sarcasm was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But instead of making her point, it just made her look smaller, more petty. The audience's respect for her was evaporating by the second. Meanwhile, backstage, Keanu was being asked if he wanted to make a statement. He shook his head. "I just want to leave," he said quietly. "Please." His team nodded and started clearing a path for him to exit through the back of the building, away from the chaos. As Keanu walked down the corridor, past framed photos of smiling celebrities who had appeared on the show before him, he must have wondered how something that started so normally had gone so wrong so fast. Back in the studio, a commercial break was finally called. The second the cameras cut, Kelly sat down heavily in her chair, her hands covering her face. The audience was still buzzing, people talking to each other in hushed, urgent tones. Some were already on their phones, texting friends, posting about what they just witnessed. Production assistants were running around like the building was on fire. Someone was on the phone with network executives. Someone else was reviewing footage. Everyone knew that what had just happened would be everywhere within hours, maybe minutes. Kelly looked up at her producer, who had come to stand beside her chair. Her eyes were wide, searching for reassurance that wasn't coming. "That was good television, right?" she asked, but her voice wavered. "People like conflict. They like drama." The producer just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he said something that made Kelly's face fall completely. "That wasn't drama, Kelly. That was cruelty. There's a difference." Those same words Keanu had said. They echoed through the studio like a ghost. Kelly opened her mouth to argue, to defend herself, but nothing came out. What could she say? She had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. In the green room, before he left the building entirely, Keanu sat for a moment on a couch, just breathing. His team hovered nearby, giving him space, but staying close in case he needed anything. One of them finally spoke up. "Are you okay?" they asked gently. Keanu was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I will be," he said. "I just don't understand why she came at me like that. I've never done anything to her. I've never even met her before today." Nobody had an answer for that. Sometimes people lash out for reasons that have nothing to do with their target. Sometimes hurt people. Sometimes the pressure of fame and television and constant performance makes people crack in ugly ways. But none of that made it okay. None of that made it hurt less. Outside the studio, word was already spreading. People on social media were posting clips, sharing reactions, taking sides. The phrase "Kelly versus Keanu" was trending before Keanu had even left the building. Public opinion was forming fast, and it wasn't in Kelly's favor. Back on the set, after the commercial break ended, Kelly tried to continue the show with her next scheduled guest, but the energy was wrong. Everything was wrong. The audience was cold. The guest seemed uncomfortable. Kelly herself couldn't seem to find her rhythm. She kept stumbling over her words, losing her train of thought. The show that was supposed to showcase Kelly's interviewing skills and warm personality had instead revealed something else entirely. Something harsh. Something that didn't sit well with people who had tuned in expecting lighthearted entertainment. As Keanu finally stepped out of the building through a back exit, fresh air hitting his face, he paused and looked up at the sky. The afternoon sun was starting to dip lower. The city noise hummed around him. Life was continuing as normal for everyone else, even though his day had been anything but normal. His team guided him toward a waiting car. As he slid into the back seat, someone asked if he wanted to stop anywhere, if he needed anything. Keanu just shook his head. "I just want to go home," he said quietly. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the studio behind. But the impact of what had happened in that studio would ripple outward for much longer than the interview itself had lasted. 30 seconds was all it took. 30 seconds for Kelly to make that first dismissive comment. And from there, everything had unraveled. Inside the studio, as the show wrapped up for the day, crew members were unusually quiet. Usually there was chatter, jokes, people making plans for after work. But today, everyone just wanted to pack up and leave. The atmosphere was heavy with the knowledge that they had all been part of something that felt very wrong. Kelly retreated to her dressing room without speaking to anyone. Through the closed door, people could hear her on the phone, her voice rising and falling in agitation. She was already trying to control the narrative, trying to explain herself, trying to make people understand her side. But out in the real world, in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already coming in. Keanu, meanwhile, arrived home to the quiet sanctuary of his own space. He set his keys down, took off his jacket, and just stood in his living room for a moment, letting the silence wash over him. There would be calls to make, statements to consider, decisions about how to handle this. But for now, he just needed to be still. The thing about Keanu that people have always understood, the thing that makes him so beloved, is his fundamental decency. He doesn't ask for special treatment. He doesn't demand worship or praise. He just tries to move through the world with kindness and respect. And when someone violates that basic social contract, when someone decides to attack him for sport, it reveals more about them than it ever could about him. What happened in that studio wasn't about tough journalism or hard-hitting questions. It wasn't about holding celebrities accountable or breaking through a manufactured image. It was about one person deciding to tear down another person for reasons that had nothing to do with the person being torn down. Kelly had her reasons, whatever they were. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe she thought creating conflict would boost ratings. Maybe she resented Keanu's reputation and wanted to take him down a peg. Maybe she was dealing with her own demons and they came out in the worst possible way. But intentions don't erase impact. And the impact of what she did was clear for everyone to see. As evening fell, Keanu sat in his living room, a cup of tea cooling on the table beside him. He thought about the audience members who had gasped, the crew members who had looked uncomfortable, the producer who had tried to intervene too late. He thought about Kelly's face, twisted with an anger that seemed to come from somewhere deep and unexamined. And, mostly, he thought about how quickly things can change. How you can walk into a room expecting one thing and walk out having experienced something completely different. How words, once spoken, can't be taken back. How respect, once lost, is almost impossible to regain. The interview that was supposed to promote a film, that was supposed to be a friendly conversation between a host and a guest, had instead become a moment that would define both of their public images in ways neither had anticipated. For Keanu, It reinforced what people already believed about him: his grace under pressure, his unwillingness to engage in ugliness, his quiet dignity. For Kelly, it revealed cracks in the persona she had built: the friendly host, the relatable star, the warm presence in people's living rooms. All of it called into question by 30 seconds of meanness that spiraled into minutes of increasingly desperate attempts to justify the unjustifiable. In the silence of his home, Keanu finally picked up his phone. There were dozens of messages, friends checking in, colleagues expressing support, his team asking how he wanted to proceed. He scrolled through them all, taking in the concern and care, feeling grateful for the people in his life who had his back. He started typing a response to his manager. Something simple, something that acknowledged what happened without giving it more energy than it deserved. Because that's who Keanu is. He doesn't engage in public feuds. He doesn't seek revenge. He just continues being himself, doing his work, treating people with kindness. The story of what happened in that studio would be told and retold. People would analyze it, debate it, use it as an example in discussions about celebrity culture, interview ethics, and the importance of basic human decency. Think pieces would be written. Social media would buzz for days. But at the heart of it all was something very simple: a person being cruel to another person for no good reason. And that person, faced with that cruelty, making the choice to walk away rather than sink to that level, to preserve his dignity rather than sacrifice it for the sake of good television or viral moments. As Keanu set his phone down and looked out his window at the darkening sky, he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be questions to answer, decisions to make about whether to address this publicly or let it speak for itself. But tonight, he just needed to sit with what had happened, to process it, to let himself feel whatever he needed to feel. Because that's the thing about being human. We all get hurt. We all face moments where people treat us in ways we don't deserve. The question is how we respond. Do we lash out in return? Do we let it change us into something harder, meaner, more cynical? Or do we hold on to who we are, even when it's difficult, even when it would be easier to become someone else? Keanu had made his choice. He walked away. He preserved himself. He refused to participate in a spectacle that diminished both parties. And in doing so, he showed everyone watching exactly why he has the reputation he does. Not because of some carefully crafted public relations campaign, but because of who he fundamentally is when the cameras are rolling and when they're not. The lights in Kelly's studio were dark now. The audience had gone home with a story to tell. The crew had packed up their equipment. The building stood quiet, holding within its walls the memory of what had transpired. And somewhere in that silence was a lesson about the cost of cruelty, the value of dignity, and the simple truth that how we treat people matters more than ratings, more than viral moments, more than any temporary gain that comes from tearing someone else down.